Continuing today with our coverage of this week's federal budget, the opposition Conservatives are describing it as, quote, wasteful and inflationary.
Now he's adding $40 billion of new debt and new spending. That's $2,400 of new inflation. That is why Conservatives will vote against this wasteful, inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit.
The Bloc Québécois and the Greens have also pledged to vote against the budget. The NDP, meanwhile, say the Liberals failed to tackle corporate greed, but have yet to decide whether they'll support it.
We're concerned about the fact that the Liberals ignored the opportunity to take on corporate greed. We know the major driver that is driving up the cost of living is corporate greed.
Here to talk more about the budget, our Deputy Conservative Leader, Melissa Lantsman, and NDP finance critic, Davies. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for this. I appreciate it. Ms. Lantsman, I'll start with you. Would a Conservative government reverse the capital gains tax changes that the Liberals have brought in with this budget?
Well, let's get back to how we started. We have the Prime Minister who said 8 years ago, 9 budgets ago, that the rich would pay their fair share. And we know what has happened is that that's not the case. It isn't Justin Trudeau and people like him who have a trust fund who can shelter away those taxes. It isn't the billionaires that he vacations with on islands that move their money to other jurisdictions that have paid this. It's everyday Canadians, welders, plumbers, single mothers, seniors that have paid for all of the spending and all of the taxes that Justin Trudeau has imposed on Canadians.
So I don't understand if that's not really an answer to the question about whether a Conservative government would change that policy in particular, which does apply actually to corporate trusts.
Actually, we're going to continue to focus on axing the tax and building the homes and fixing the budget and stopping the crime. That's what we're talking about with Canadians. And I'm sure that when we have a platform, you will be the first to know, and we might even announce it on your show.
Well, I look forward to that very much. But I think, like in this instance, I'm just asking for your policy position on something very specific that, and I'll be totally transparent, the Liberals are using to try and wedge against you, right? They're trying to say that your party, as a consequence of not coming out in support of this measure, is not prepared to make wealthy people in this country pay their fair share. You can dispel that very easily by saying we would keep it or we would reverse it, but you're not.
We're going to fight a Prime Minister who hasn't made anybody pay, or hasn't had the rich guy pay for his promises. He's had everyday Canadians pay for every single one of his inflationary budgets that he's brought forward. And when we do have a platform, you will be the first to know.
So it's fair to say you don't have a position on that tax change at this point?
Well, we're going to continue to fight the fight that we have been fighting for everyday Canadians who are paying far too much, paying more for gas, for groceries, for home heating. They can't afford to live, and that's why we are going to vote against this budget.
Mr. Davies, Ms. Lantsman has expressed what the Conservatives have said so far. They're not going to support this budget. The Bloc will not support this budget. Will the NDP?
Well, we're still analyzing the budget. It's 416 pages long. There's a lot in there. You know, where I would start, Ashley, is by saying that right now I think the dominant, fact that should be concerning Parliament is that people are really struggling in this country. Millions of people are struggling with high prices for rent, can't buy food. People, the idea of home ownership is illusory for almost anybody under the age of 35. People are really hurting. And so what the NDP did is we used our seats in the House of Commons to try to get concrete measures in this budget that will help people. And I think we did that. So I'll just give you 3 quick examples. Pharmacare is in this budget, $1.5 billion to get it started. That'll help 9 million people of child-bearing age in this country, millions of people suffering by diabetes, who sometimes are thousands of dollars out of pocket every year. Second, the first ever National School Nutrition Program, which not only helps kids stay healthy and learn better, but also helps their families who are struggling with the high price of food. And finally, there's extensive commitments in there for housing, to keep affordable housing that we have, to build more affordable housing that people can afford, to help renters. So these are core.
So does that mean you support the budget?
Well, we're still analyzing, like I said, because there's things in the budget that we don't like. And we're taking the time not only to fully digest it, but also to consult with people because we think that's important.
I understand the utility of a lot of what you just laid out, but to Ms. Lantsman's point, we have the Bank of Canada governor warning that excessive spending at the federal and provincial level could work against the monetary policy he's pursuing. In layman's terms, that means he could take longer to cut rates because of the level of spending. The NDP have pushed the Liberals by implementing these programs at this juncture to spend more money. Why aren't you more worried about how much that will impact the cost of living for everyday Canadians?
Well, we are. First of all, supplying more housing is anti-inflationary.
Not in the short term, with due respect.
It's anti-inflationary. Every major economist we've consulted has said that. When you put more supply of housing in the market, it has a dampening effect on prices. There's excessive demand right now. When you put more supply out, it will reduce prices. Second of all, we have been calling for more revenue measures. So interestingly about the capital gains tax, the inclusion rate under Brian Mulroney, the Conservatives, was 75%. It dropped to 50%, and this budget puts it to 67%. So it's not even as high as it was under the Conservatives in the 1980s. But we've also called for things like a one-time excess profits tax on the oil and gas industry, who made $63 billion, highest in history in 2022.
How do you know that those extra taxes wouldn't be passed on to consumers, again further exacerbating the cost of living issues for them?
Well, you can make that argument about all taxes. By that argument, you'd have no taxes on corporations because some of it can be flowed through, it's true, but a lot of it is not. And I think that if we put a 15% tax on profits over $1 billion on the financial sector in 2022, why wouldn't we do that to the oil and gas sector, whose profits dwarf what was made by the financial sector then?
Because the royalties made off of that sector contribute hugely to the federal coffers.
Well, it's a question of, oil and gas companies benefit enormously from public investment. The roads that the public pays for, the schools that educate their workers, all of the infrastructure that allows them to build and make profits. So we're just asking them to pay their fair share towards the infrastructure that provides the ability for them to make their profits. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Ms. Lantsman, when you talk about the level of spending, we're looking at $53 billion over 6 years, 39 if you take into account anticipated, not yet realized, but anticipated savings. What would the Conservatives not spend that money on? Would it not be creating housing supply, not launching a national food program for kids or lunch program for kids, or not spending on defense?
Look, I think you're asking hypothetical questions. There is no food program. There is no pharmacare program. There is no dental care program. There's 8 dentists in all of Nova Scotia who have signed up for this program. None of these programs actually exist to help people. And it's for the NDP to get up in the House every single day and scream at the Prime Minister about why the cost of living is so high, why he's created this problem, and then enthusiastically support every single measure that continues to make the lives of every Canadian harder. I don't get it. I don't think their voters get it. I don't think Canadians get it. But I do think they're protecting their leader's pension, and I do think that they are protecting the Prime Minister from having the carbon tax election that we want.
I understand the point you're making, and we can ask Mr. Davies about that. I can ask Mr. Davies about that in a second. But my question is not hypothetical, because what they have baked into their spending plan is rolling out these programs, and some of them, like the Canada Child Benefit, like daycare, for example, are already in existence through agreements with the provinces. I think Canadians are really unclear at this point about, if you think spending is too high, what wouldn't you spend on? Other than the infrastructure bank, other than the Arrive Can app, none of that gets you to a place where you eliminate the deficit, which you've pledged to do.
Well, we'll cut the $21 billion in consultants. We'll cut all of the waste.
So you're never going to hire a single consultant as a Conservative government? Because you did a lot of that under the Harper government.
$21 billion in outside consultants when our public service has grown and our services are actually worse off is something that I think Canadians expect a responsible government to look at. We have debt servicing costs, meaning the interest that we pay on the debt, that are now higher than what we spend on health care in every single province. We think that's unacceptable, and I think most Canadians do too.
I'm not debating whether or not that's acceptable or not. I think you're right. A lot of Canadians feel unsettled by the idea, especially of debt servicing costs exceeding health care transfers because of the state of health care across this country. But they are interested in knowing how you get to a point where that isn't the case. And your party has so far refused to identify, for example, even of the new money announced in this budget, what you wouldn't spend.
No, look, we're going to cut taxes for Canadians. We're going to make sure that our productivity is higher, that we're developing our resources to grow our economy. And you will see that plan in a platform in the next election. And if we can have that carbon tax election ahead of the time where Mr. Davies and his party are protecting the Prime Minister, we'll go for it.
So until then, nobody will know anything about what you plan to do?
I think we've been very clear with Canadians.
I know you get rid of the carbon tax.
We're going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're also going to build homes. We're going to fix the budget, and we're going to stop the crime.
Okay, building homes costs money. But anyway, Mr. Davies, I want to pick up on a point that Ms. Lantsman made, and that is around your party criticizing where you feel the government has fallen short. I believe at one point I've even heard Mr. Singh say that Mr. Trudeau has been a failure as Prime Minister, and yet the reason he remains Prime Minister is because of your party's support. How can you reconcile that for people watching right now?
Because we do something that is rare in politics. We keep our word. We signed a confidence and supply agreement that said that in exchange for us supporting the government, we extracted 27 different demands from this government. This was not a shared agenda. This is not things that we agree on with Liberals. These were things that we forced them to do. Now, the big ticket items like dental care and pharmacare, by definition, took some time to develop. And Ms. Lantsman, with great respect, is totally wrong. They are real. There's 1.7.
But those dentists are not signing up. With great respect, I asked Minister Holland multiple times. There's hardly any who
There's
have
no requirement to sign up now. That requirement has lifted. You watch, dentists will sign up by the droves in May.
You're confident in this government to execute on that program
100%.
based on their record?
100%. 1.7 million Canadians have already signed up. You're going to see people go to the dentist in May. We're enrolling 500,000 Canadians per month, and we'll do so every month through the rest of this year. We started last December. In pharmacare, Ms. Lantsman knows there's legislation in the House right now. It'll be passed by June, and I'm already told that there are provinces chomping at the bit to sign an agreement with the federal government. Why wouldn't you? The federal government is going to give 100% of the money to any premier who agrees to provide diabetes class medication devices and contraceptives for free through their public health care system. As long as the province agree to do that. Of course they're going to do that. These programs are real.
Again, I recognize the utility in the programs, but with respect, Mr. Davies, you at the same time look Canadians in the eye as a party and say the country is so much worse off. You can't buy a home. You can't afford the cost of living right now because of the leadership of the Liberal government. Is it worth it to keep them in power to get pharmacare, a little bit of pharmacare and dental care?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to complete the agreement that we made. We said we'd support this agreement till June 2025, this government, pardon me. And we still have, dental care still has to be fully entrenched. Pharmacare, the legislation is not passed. So we want to
support the budget.
We want to carry through with those. You know, it's something that we're still evaluating.
But you have to, because you just said you'll keep your word on the agreement, which goes until June.
Well, there's also room to keep extracting things. You know, Jack Layton used to tell us a good opposition doesn't just oppose, it proposes. And with great respect as well, slogans and generalities and evading questions are not, I don't think, responsible at this time. The Liberals have said what they would do in their budget. The NDP has proposed what we would do. And the Conservatives are being evasive about that.
But you also won't say whether you're supported or not, while at the same time saying you're going to keep up your end of the bargain to keep them in power until next year.
Well, we'll have that decision in a couple of weeks. I don't think you're going to hear the Conservatives reveal their position to Canadians in the next couple of weeks either. They're telling you that they're going to do it next election. And that's because I think they're afraid of what Canadians will do when they know what Conservatives will really do. Cut dental care, cut child care, cut support for renters. They will not proceed with the school nutrition program. They will cut and take away those benefits from Canadians, and they don't want Canadians to know that.
Do you want to respond to that? I have to go. But
Well, look, Mr. Davies, you continue to pretend to oppose this government. While all of the NDP people who brought you here, you are serving your master to protect your leader's pension, and I think Canadians know that. Regardless, you are going to support this budget, and you might as well tell Canadians that here.
does he have a point, though, that you're not presenting any alternative?
Well, we're going to present an alternative in the election,
Later.
and we'll be happy for you to vote non-confidence in this government like you were sent here to do.
We're serving Canadians.
I'm going to leave
That's
it
who we're
there. I
serving.
appreciate you both making the time, as always. Thank you so much to Don Davies and Melissa Lantsman.